Hi, welcome back to the thoughtbot Rails Development Live stream. I hope you've been having a good week so far. In the US, we had Halloween this week, and as the parent of two teenagers, it was exciting as always. Also, Halloween is one of my favorite holidays, always has been. It's fun to dress up and go around the neighborhood. Today we're going to be doing some Rails development, continuing on the system that we've been working on for most of the last couple of weeks, an internal system that we have at thoughtbot called Hub. It does our scheduling, our staffing, and it connects to lots of different services out there. It's a Rails monolith application. And we've been doing Rails for since Rails was created, basically, over 15 years ago. So if you want to work with thoughtbot to make a new Rails app, maintain, improve, or scale an existing one, take a look at thoughtbot.com/hire us and get in touch. And hopefully we can work together on something like we're working on today. Let me just pause the music. I'm going to share my screen now. What we're going to work on today, as I mentioned previously, we use GitHub projects to work on this. And at the top of our next up column, we have a fairly long-standing issue, actually. What it is when you go to enter time working on a project in the schedule, the system is built to schedule week to week, full weeks at a time. And so if you want to schedule a single day, what you're supposed to do in theory is put the start on day of a certain day, usually Monday, and the end on date would normally be a future week. But if you're just scheduling for a single day, it's natural to put that same day in there. And then you get a validation error message that says it must be after the start date. And that's because there's a validation that says it must be after the start date. But I believe putting in the same start and end date is valid, or should be valid. And it's confusing to get a message that you can't do that. And so that's what we're going to start working on. I don't think it's going to take us the full time. So if we finish this, and we'll pick up another issue on the backlog. So let's take a look in the UI, and I can show you. We can look at this page. So we have our schedule view, and then we're going to look at we're going to add an assignment, and this is the page that we're doing. So if we did, it's automatically setting it to, what day is that? Sunday. So if we did tomorrow. Okay, so we're not able to reproduce it in the UI here. It looks like the end date is always being set to the end of the week. Which may be something that's going on. It may, like I said, this is a long-standing issue, so it's possible that someone has adjusted it to always be the end of the week. So let's go over to the code. This is called commitments. So that's a commitment model. And we can, here's the validation. Validate that ends on date after starts on. So this is a date validator, which is not something built into Rails. So that must be something custom to this application. And that this date ends on is after starts on. So now I want to see about that functionality for populating. I want to understand what's happening here. So I want to see that the functionality for populating the end date. I'm going to look in the controller first, since I suspect that that's typically where that kind of thing would happen. Okay, I don't see anything that jumps out at me in the controller for that. We just have a normal stock, pretty straightforward controller here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Hey Mushu, thank you for watching as usual. Speaking of which, I wanted to call out, feel free to let us know you're here, say hi over the course of the day here. If you got any comments or questions throughout, definitely don't hesitate to drop them in the chat, and I will see them. Hey, Mayra. Sorry if I mispronounce anybody's names. So I don't see anything in the controller here, so I'm going to look in the model. Commitment is it is in the models directory, but it is not an active record model. It is a sort of form object that's responsible for this commitments form here. And what it actually does is iterates over the whole date range that you specified with all the settings that you specified and puts it onto the schedule. And the model of the stuff that's actually on the schedule is called an assignment. And so it builds out a whole bunch of assignments. And so that's the commitment model. So what I'm looking for now is something that sets ends on. Okay, so I see in the initializer, if ends on is nil, it's going to do a default ends on. So that explains why, week. So the beginning of the week, the end of the current week is the default. And that's when we come to this page with nothing, that's what we're getting. We're getting the end of the current week. So that's where that's coming from. And so what we also saw was when I changed it to something, it was getting reset. So I'm just going through and looking for any ends on. So I'm not seeing that, which is interesting. And so next I want to go over and look at the commitment spec and see whether there's any particular spec that specifies this behavior that we're seeing. It receives params and assigns them. That one's setting it to 30 days from now and checks that it's 30 days from now. So defaults end date to Friday of this week. That's now it's Sunday. I'm not going to change that. I like to not change things right away. It might be that spec description is out of date. And initialize hourly day assignments if project is hourly billing. So that's fine. Okay, that's not specifying any behavior about end date. So this does not persist any day assignments if the commitment is invalid. So that doesn't do anything. Okay, I don't see anything. We're back at the top of the file now. I don't see anything that describes that behavior. So at this point, I've looked in all of the obvious places for the behavior of setting the end date. All that I see is the validation for the date being after the date. But I want to make sure that I understand why this is happening here, because it just makes me uncomfortable to have something that's happening that I don't understand. Oh, one more place we could look is in the feature spec. So what I'm doing here is looking to see whether I see anything that jumps out at me for this behavior about why end date is being overridden. Ends on is being overridden. Okay, here's something. Input an invalid start and end date. So starts on is being set to the previous week's end date. Ends on is being set to the previous week's start date. So start and end date are being flipped. And then we get the validation ends on must be after. Okay, so that is not, and then we're at the end of the file. Okay, did I already look through the model? Yes, I did. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is write a model spec for the behavior about it getting set to Friday. And I want to see whether that if I can write a spec where it goes back to Friday. I'm just looking for a place where we're going to put that. So what I think is happening and what I'm writing is it sets the end date to the end of the week if not week if it is not. So we're going to create the commitment, and so the starts on will be set to the beginning of the week, and the ends on will be set to the beginning of the week plus 1 day. That's all I was doing in the view. I wasn't setting any other things here. So as of right now, I expect that to so this describes the behavior that I was seeing. So we're just putting that plus 1 day as the end date. And then when we attempt to save, the ends on gets reset to the end of the week. So let's run that and see what happens. So if you haven't watched me before, I have keyboard shortcuts set up to run just the focus spec of what my cursor is on. I highly recommend that you set that up in your editor. It really speeds up the test-driven development cycle. Okay, so our spec expected to get the end of this week, and it didn't. It just stayed the date that we set. So let's just try setting a person and project, setting a few more things on here, see what. Okay, so that created something on the schedule with those dates that I put in there once I provided a person and a project. So what do we think is happening? When the validations completely fail, this is being set back to there. So I'm just gonna what I want to do is verify that this is. I'm just gonna expect commitment to not be valid. Not to be valid. So it is registering as valid there, which is really interesting to me. Again, I'm not quite sure at this point what's going on. I'm trying to pinpoint what's going on. Okay, let's go take a look at commitment save. So if it's valid, then go through and save each of the day assignments. Create takes in the attributes, assigns them using initialize. Ends on. Ends on. This is interesting, and I'm a little stumped. If hey Carlos, welcome. If you see what I'm missing, if anybody sees what I'm missing, feel free to call it out in the chat, because I am not seeing an explanation for the current behavior. So let's look in the log. Just in case there's something obvious happening in the log, I'm going to tail that now. So we're going to set this to first. We've got nothing set here, and it's set back to the 5th. Oh, I think I just spotted what is actually happening here. And what I spotted is the URL of this page is commitments new. So I submitted this form. It should do a post to create, and the URL never changed to commitments new. So to me, what that means is it's actually going back to commitments new, which is initializing with blank values and setting it to the default, which is the end of the week. So let's look at that controller again. An assignment to create, if it's valid. Okay, so we're always responding with commitment. We're using the responders gem here. And that is going to respond in certain ways based on whether commitment was successful or not. So that's what's happening here. Commitment is saying that it's valid. Or not valid, and then it's going back to commitments new for some reason. I think it might be because of this restore location functionality. So I think, okay, so let's take a step back. This is not necessarily the bug that we started working on, but in the process of trying to understand the bug that we were going to work on, I've uncovered an additional bug. Again, this is what happens when you're doing real development. So now I need to make a decision. Do I want to keep on going on the tangent of fixing this bug that I've uncovered, or do I want to go back to the original bug? Let me do something that's going to help me answer this question. If I choose a person and a project and I do the original problem, I want to see whether what is on the ticket happens or whether something different happens. So let's see. Okay, so commitment could not be created, ends on must be after 11.3, and we get that. But we are back. The URL never changed from commitments new. At this point, I'm also beginning to suspect that this has something to do with Turbo, causing the page to not refresh. Looking at the form, it is using Turbo. Now we were tailing the log, so what we're getting back is 422 unprocessable entity. And what was being rendered here. So commitments new.html.erb is being rendered. So the next question I have is, did valid return true or false? I'm guessing it returned false because otherwise some stuff would have happened. And we're getting back to there. Okay. So my inclination at this point is, yes, we've uncovered another bug. If you don't enter in any people or any projects, you don't see validation error messages. And your date that you had selected gets reset. No one's reported this bug. 100 plus people use this system every week. No one's reported this bug. So I'm going to take a step back from this problem. It is probably still a bug, but the act of not setting any user or project is a little bit of an edge case. And so let's go back. Let's go back to the problem that we had. Let's remind ourselves what we already did. I wrote a spec for the bug, or I tried to write a spec for the bug that I was seeing. It did not happen. That is the only change that we made. So I'm going to git reset there. Oh, I never even committed it. I'm just going to commit reset back. And I'm going to create a new branch, fix commitment date validation for same day. And then we already had a spec. We saw it when we were looking for specs related to the other problem that we were having. That it's invalid with an ends on date before starts on and that is passing. But that's the only check. There's not a check for what happens when the end date and the start date are the same. So we're going to write a spec so it is valid with a start with the same starts on and ends on dates. So I wouldn't normally write this spec this way now, but this is the way that it is. It's being set up in a subject. So I can see this is used quite a bit right here in these validation specs. I'm not going to make a change that would be too big of a change, but so we have the subject. We want to, it is being set to the beginning of the week starts on. So we can change ends on equals subject starts on. And then we should expect the subject to be valid. So I'm expecting a failure here on this. Cool. So that failed. The failure was very large. We expected to be valid, but got errors. Ends on date must be after 10:30. So that's exactly the problem. So now we've got a spec that illustrates the behavior we don't want. And so now we can go and we can make this pass. So the validation is right here. Validates ends on. I mentioned the date validator. That's not built into Rails, so I'm curious. Date. It would be in a class called date validator. There's not one. Date. And let's just check to make sure it's not in this class. Date. Okay, it's not. So maybe that's coming from, yeah, okay. There's a gem date validator. Gem. So I don't know the syntax for that gem off the top of my head. So we'll go over to our friend Ruby Gems, go to date validator. Okay, so we have, that gives us after and before. Okay, so it gives us an after to or equal to, which is what we want. So now let's run the spec. Okay, so that's passing now. And so we've got the passing spec. It's the kind of spec where it was useful to us to put it in place, and now we validated the fix. I'm going to opt to leave this here because it specifies the behavior that we want, and we previously did not have the behavior that we wanted. And so this I'm going to just do a commit, change date validation to after or equal to. So I'm just going to save that. And then what I'd like to do is go over to the UI and make sure everything works like we're expecting. So I'm going to create the project, and for the primary use case that someone was doing is for like scheduling just something for Friday. So let's try that for this week. Oh, I need to specify Friday there. Cool. So this person isn't showing up there. We've got a bunch of people created with Faker in here. This is the person. Let's go look at their schedule. Oh, this is from when I created it before. This is the one that just happened on the schedule. So so that's working like we expect now. Cool. So going to I'm going to rewrite this commit to reference the ticket number. Oops. So previously, you couldn't create a commitment with a start date and end date that were the same. Okay, I'm going to put, because I amended the commit. So I've got a force push. And I'm going to use the GitHub gem, or GitHub binary command line to create a pull request. So now this is the pull request. We have a few different tasks here. But the primary one is CI. So if you notice, I normally will run all the specs locally and make sure that they're passing. I didn't do that because I didn't want to wait the whole time on the stream. So we're going to let this run in the background on CI, run all the specs, make sure everything's passing, and then we'll merge in the branch and we'll deploy it to production. So while that goes, let's go back to our main branch. So let me think. We could fix the problem with the commit. Hi, Joseph. Thanks very much for watching. I'm glad you think it's great. And welcome to the stream. If anybody's got any comments, questions along the way, questions are cool about what we're working on or something that jogs a question out of you related to what we're working on. I'm happy to hear it and I'm happy to try to help. Or if there's something dogging you in what you're working on and you just want to ask the question, even if I don't get to it right away, I'll try to get to it during the course of the stream. Okay, so we could pick up another ticket in the backlog, or we could actually try to fix the other bug that we were seeing. I'm a little concerned about that other bug that we were seeing, but I'm also a little concerned about the complexity of it because we've got the responders gem there. We've got turbo, and it is quite the edge case in terms of not filling out people. I'm a little reluctant to get into it on the fly. Let me just look at the spec again. So let's look at the commitment model. Just trying to, so the validation for a person and a project is by ID. So does that mean that when we in our UI go to add an assignment and we select a person, are we going to see the validation? Okay, so we're not going to see the validation message and our person is being reset. That's really annoying. I imagine that would be really annoying to a user as well. So let's create a branch to and write a spec that shows that problem. Let's call it show all. Oh, I realize I'm off the bottom of this screen here. Sorry about that. Create show all commitment validation errors, because that's the problem, is all the validation errors aren't being shown. And let's go over to the feature spec. We had one I saw for the ends on. And putting an invalid start and end date. I don't see a spec for any other validations, which isn't necessarily wrong. Often in feature specs, you do the happy path and you don't do all the other things. But at the end of the day, the only validation errors we are seeing there are the one that we have a spec for. So I guess it's not surprising that there was this bug here with this. So let's create a new scenario. See the validation errors for a missing person and project. We want this to be JS true. And the reason why we want it to be JS true is because it's possible that Turbo is creating this problem. So we want to do it with I really want to put parens around that. So we've got our person in our project here. In theory, we don't need dates because it's going to default to the current date and the current end of the week, which is fine. And then we go to the new commitment path. I noticed we have a helper here called create commitment, which fills in person, project, and the end dates and clicks on create assignments. We don't want to do any of that for this spec. We just want to go to the page, click on create assignments, and we should see something like person can't be blank. I actually think it's going to be like person ID can't be blank, but let's check the validates person ID. Yeah, so, but that's fine for the purposes of like we're getting a spec that's going to fail, and we're going to try to make it pass, and we can customize the error message to be what we want it to be at any point along the way. So after we do that. So we've got unused variable here. Person is being used, but project's not being used. Actually think that it doesn't matter. We don't even need a project because we're not setting one. We only need the person to be able to log in. So let's run that spec. I'm expecting it to fail and not see what that text on the page. Okay, can't find the record with friendly ID empty on project. Okay. So I actually wonder whether this is happening. This is what is happening in the code. And for some reason, the 422 is not causing the page to be re-rendered with responders. So what's happening is there is a helper here to get the project from the ID. When we submitted to create, the project method is called, and if project ID is nil, but we see here it's an empty string. So that's a really interesting bug because we're getting an empty string, but we are only checking for nil. This is a reason why a lot of people recommend not just doing if and then something when you expect it with nil, particularly in a Rails app, because you could have blank values and they would still pass this check. And so a lot of people recommend, out of pain, writing this like this instead. We probably will end up doing that, but I've added a feature spec, but that would change the model. And it's also not necessarily the problem that we have there. So I don't want to just go and do that without, changing things all over the place. But so we expected to find the text person can't be blank, and we didn't find it. Okay, so now let's put that back and run it and see what happens. So it passed. That is the root cause of the problem. It's not what I expected it to be. I expected it to be a problem with Turbo and that, but I think what was happening, remember we saw the 422 unprocessable entity. My guess is that is not something that is going to cause Turbo to display the error. So let's go back here and now let's hit this and see what we see. Yeah, so now we're getting the validation errors that we expected. They're good. It says person can't be blank. It's not saying person ID or project ID. So that's perfect. And it looks to me like we've just fixed the bug. So we've got a green passing spec here. I need to just think, do we want to add another spec for this change at the model level? So we could add a commitment model spec that sets project ID to a blank string and validates that it does an error, it gets a valid message. The reason why I like doing that is because this feature spec here doesn't describe the problem. This just describes the behavior that we want to have to see the validation error messages. And that was a symptom of an underlying problem about an exception being thrown because a blank string was being passed in. So this describes behavior, but it doesn't necessarily 100% prevent regressions against this problem. So I feel like we should solve it one level down, because at the very least, it's going to help a future person where if this is a regression, there's going to be a more focused spec that says what the problem actually is. And it's going to be pretty fast and inexpensive to write this spec. So we're in a validations block here. So we say it does not error if person ID is an empty string. So the way I'm going to write this is we don't expect it to be empty. We expect it to be can't be blank. Yep. Okay, let's see what that does. Remember, I removed the if present check. So what we're expecting is to get an exception. Undefined. This should be to equal. So what I expected was to get an exception here, and I'm not getting it. Let's just go back to And I bet the reason why is because it's not actually hitting that method. So let's go back up to that trace there and see where it was actually being called from. It was being called in the validation of expected hours, making sure that the project is hourly billing. And then it would also be here for expected amount of day. Let's see. Okay, so see how expected amount of day isn't set to anything there. So let's try setting let's see if that behaves more like we expect. Okay, so for the size of this bug, I think we need to be realistic about the amount of time it's worth working on this. And this is, not to gloat or anything like that. I'm not say this to gloat, but like this is one of the things that can help you be a productive developer is to realize when it's not worth spending time on something given the magnitude of the problem. We've already written a spec that demonstrates that and we were only trying to add a model spec to prevent further, like, so to make it easier to identify the source of the problem if this ever happens again. I'm gonna say this is not worth figuring out even more. We've got a spec with a typo in it. We've got a spec that shows we fixed the problem. And so let's run that again. It's going to fail because we removed the code. Cool. So that fails when we remove the code. And then we'll run it again. Okay, so that passed. Show commitment validation errors for, let's say, all fields. When a validation with project or person failed, the error was not displayed to the user. This fixes the underlying exception that was being caught by Turbo and not rendered, so that the validation errors are rendered. Okay, I'm going to push up this branch, open a pull request for it, and while CI runs for that one, we're going to go and look at our pull request for So it looks like CI failed. Let's go see what it is. Cool. What I'm happy to see, well, happy is all relative. The failure is in other schedule related specs, the commitment model and managing the schedule. So that means that something we changed did break something. And you can see the error messages are commitment could not be created and ends on must be after or equal to 11 to 23. To include ends on must be after. So we've broken something. So we'll switch back to our branch. And the specs were so I'm running one of the failures. The error is for the message. It should say ends on must be after the date. And now it's ends on must be after or equal is what it should say. And now, and what it's saying is after or equal because we changed that. Okay. And then the second failure is it's a big, I happen to know this feature spec is a big spec that does a full like end to end spec of of entering something onto the schedule, checking that it's there. If I remember right, that's what it's doing. So what it's doing is attempting to add an invalid commitment for a person. Oh, that's not the spec that I thought it was going to be. So it is expecting to find commitment could not be created, and it's not finding it. So let's see what's going on here. Well, what the spec is doing is setting the start and end date to the same day of the week. And that is valid now. We made it valid. So what we need to do is change this to be I think it's this week.previous.start date. I think that's what it is. So that's going to set the end date to the prior week. And now that's passing. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit these changes. And then I'm going to rebase against main. And I'm just going to go ahead and squash that and push it back up. And so CI is going to run the specs. So let's go check on that other pull request that we had here. Okay, so looks like CI is still running. Actually, it looks like everything is still running, which is really weird. I wonder whether GitHub is having some sort of problem. That one completed, and yet it still says it's running. This looks like, oh, okay, that one finished. Looks like something's slowed down on the GitHub side. Okay, we'll give that a little bit more time. And while those run, let's take a look at the, oh, sometimes when I'm streaming, I forget to actually move the tickets forward. Okay, so the next item in the backlog, so on the schedule, we have the concept of a commitment or an assignment, which is what people work on. And then we have the concept of a reservation, which is time where people are not available to work on consulting work at thoughtbot. Speaking of consulting work at thoughtbot, shameless plug, we are available to help you upgrade your Rails app, maintain it, make it better, best practice refactoring, improve your test coverage. We also do mobile development, and we do great product design as well. So if you need any help with anything, don't hesitate to get in touch at thoughtbot.com/hire us. So we have the concept of a reservation where someone's not available. Something was recently added where there's another view of someone's reservations, and it's totaling up. Oh no, I'm misremembering what this ticket is. So this ticket is reservations are double counting. If someone creates a reservation, a vacation across a week and a half, and that week and a half also includes a holiday, a public holiday, it's counting both. And what we really want is the public holiday should show up as the public holiday. And then when we ask how many total days of vacation there were, it shouldn't count the day with the public holiday. So that'll be a fun thing to write. So let's tee that up to work on next. Just checking on our CI builds over here. So it looks like we had another failure. Oh no, it's still running. Okay. So we're going to check out main again. We're going to create a branch. Reservation overlapping holidays. So where this manifests is on, you can see it in here, the PTO report. So that's in reports, paid time off report. There's a spec for it, includes reservations during the time period. It sets up a bunch of reservations and then runs the report and makes sure that the ones that we expect to be included are included. Okay. So, and then here are some specs for saying how many days are in the time off. So this is where, in theory, we want to add a spec for the change we're making. The only thing is, and the reason why I say in theory, is because if we go, I happen to know from working on this and from some other people's problems that this report is doing the calculations of how many days time off something is, and is doing it on the reservation model. And as this logic grows and grows, when this first started, the report was simple, like, how many days is it? And it just put the days of the reservation. And then we changed the report, we changed the functionality, and so now it is doing only the work days in between that. And it's possible to do this report for just 1 week. So if someone's reservation time off is spanning multiple weeks, you want to say, oh, I'm running it just for this week, so it should only include the days within the period that I'm reporting on. So it needs to compute the work days in the period. Those work days come, people work different days, so those come for there. So we've built up all of this logic, and it's all been in the report. And that's really the wrong place to have this logic, because it means that if another place in our application needs to find out how many days a reservation is technically for, it's going to count wrong. And about 3 weeks ago, a bug came in that is exactly that. Where is it? Here it is, counting Saturdays and Sundays. So about 3 weeks ago, Moses, great designer on the thoughtbot team, created this saying, hey, I'm seeing Saturdays and Sundays being counted in my vacation time. Now, on the official report for accounting, that bug doesn't exist. So I asked, where are you seeing this? And there is a new section. I don't know that we're going to be able to see it in the test data here, but everyone has a dashboard and has a profile in Hub. Yeah, here it is. So there's a block on the profile that says how much time you've used and have upcoming for time off. And turns out that is just, actually we can go look. That is just using, on the reservation model, this method total days. And you can see it is just taking the days in between, the number of days in between the end date and the start date. And so it's counting weekends. And so that's no good. So that's exactly the kind of bug where if you have an object that is doing some stuff that is, and ultimately it's not really responsible for that thing, it's not quite in the right place, then someone else is going to develop some functionality using that model, and they're not going to know about that, and they're going to introduce either the same bugs you already fixed elsewhere or new bugs. So I want to fix this. I want to tackle these two tickets are related, but in order to fix this second one about Saturdays and Sundays being, I think I want to move this reporting functionality for I want to take the specs for that. I want to move them to the model. And then I want to move the logic for that into the model. Now, I can already tell this is not going to be entirely straightforward. And the reason why is because the report needs to only do in a certain period how many days. Ooh, and I'm just realizing as I say that if I go in here, this is also doing calendar year and anniversary year. So we can make this method on the reservation model be able to take a start date and an end date, and the dashboard will give the full year and the anniversary year, and the report will give just the reporting period. So that's perfect. It's not going to be as difficult as I thought it was going to be. Okay, cool. So let's find the specs for this thing. We had them up earlier. So for a person that works Sunday through Thursday, returns the number of business days. So we have people on our team that live in countries where the work week is Sunday through Thursday. So that's why we have the concept of work days, and being able to count them is different based on the working schedule of the person. This is a really complicated, like, time off schedule. If you ever worked on like a payroll system or a time off tracking system, this kind of scheduling system tends to be pretty complicated because you have these weird, you have date things, you have time zone things, you have lots of different things. So Mayra asks how our calendar and anniversary days filled. The calendar, I'm not sure I understand the question. So feel free to clarify in the chat. But the anniversary year would be the person's start date plus 1 year, the whole year from anniversary to anniversary, and calendar would be the current calendar year. If that doesn't answer your question, feel free to clarify in the chat. Cool. So let's take these specs. What we're going to do is I'm going to move them all to the model. There's actually quite a few specs here, which is nice to see. I accidentally didn't get the right. So many of them okay, we're just going to one level in. And we'll go over to the reservation model spec. So here's a spec for total days. I suspect that is going to go away eventually. But let's just start by copying in. So, and now we're in a model spec. So I'm just going to rewrite this. And I think what we want to do is so now that is a spec for the days in period method of the reservation model. So all these specs, most of them, I think, use travel to. So that is, it's basically mocking out that the actual date is a different date. And so in our specs, we often do this when something is using really complicated date logic, because you can write things looking for specific days. But if you don't know when the weekends are, and then next year the weekends fall on different days, it's going to make your specs really brittle. So one way around that is to say, hey, I'm writing these specs and I'm traveling, I'm making time.now and timezone.now and everything, and date.current and all that stuff. They're going to start returning this specific day. And so then you can write specs that know a specific day. So now I'm just going to go through and modify these specs to be for the new method that so the way that this is going to work is we're going to expect reservation days in period. I'm going to just change how this is formatted. We'll do this. So then we're expecting it to be 5. Oh, no, days to equal 5. So we have our setup, our exercise, and then we're expecting it. Great. So there's only a couple of other specs, so we're going to change those too. And then we expect the days to equal 1 for that. So it has a value of 0 when only a weekend is in the reporting period. Okay, cool. So I'll do the so now change this. Okay, for a person who works a Sunday through Thursday week, it returns the number of business days for key business days. Okay, that throws a little bit of a wrench in the works. I was not expecting. Wait, for key business days. And then there's nothing here. Let's go over to the report and look for business days. Okay, so that's interesting. It looks like that used to be a column on our report, and now it's not there anymore. So that is and that's not what's in the spec. So this is a case of the spec is saying something which is no longer returns the number of business days. So it doesn't really return the number of business days. It returns days in the reservation that are their working days. So they work a Sunday through Thursday week. Where is that defined? It's a workdays helper. So it's in support helpers, workdays helper. So that's fine. We should have that available in our spec. So Sunday through Thursday week. So that person has a position, Sunday through Thursday, working week. I'm going to move this down below. The reservation is on those specific days. Okay. Cool. So we could pick any one of these specs and try to run it. Let's pick the most straightforward one, which is the first one, excluding weekends. It's going to fail horribly because undefined method days and period. So we don't have that. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to just copy over the code from the report because here's why. Let me explain why. My take is after looking at this code, it's a little hard to follow. There's 3 helpers here. 4 helpers used for doing it. We might end up with the same thing, but I'm inclined to not just copy this over because the implementation might be a little bit different. And maybe I'm being, I don't know, not clear, but days and period, end date, start date. Okay, ends on, starts on. That could be a little confusing. So we're naming this period starts on and period ends on. You know what? How about we call this days in range? You like that naming better? I sort of like that naming better. Days in range. So we changed it everywhere. Part of the reason why I like that is because then that allows us to just say, makes it a little bit more clear that these are not we could even take in a range, but that'll be a little weird. I don't know if you know, but you can't name a variable end because that's a keyword in Ruby. So that's not going to work. That's why I'm saying need to prefix it with something. Okay. So we're going to use the existing code as a guide, but we're not necessarily going to just implement it without looking at it first. So reservation in workdays in period. Reservation workdays in period, the length of that times the amount of days. So it's possible for someone to have a reservation for just half days for a certain number of days. So that's why it's being multiplied by the amount of days. And workdays in period, it's doing the intersection of their workdays and the days in the reservation workdays, and it's taking that and getting the number of days. There's already a method on person to give you the workdays between two dates. Okay, I'm starting to rethink what I was saying. I'm thinking maybe I am going to use this as the basis and just so we could say workdays in now we no longer need to pass in or use record because it is self here. Workdays in period. So this is workdays in range. Whoops. So this is sort of nice. It's cleaning this all up to be a little bit more. Why did we end up with two methods with the same name? Reservation workdays. Maybe I'm changing too much naming all at once here. Workdays in range, reservation workdays. Yeah, so by removing the word reservation, prefixing this thing, I accidentally created two methods that were named the same, which is not good. So this is just this. So it's person work days between those dates, the intersection of the reservations work days. Okay, so now we have a workdays method, which gives you the workdays between the reservation start and end date, and then the workdays in a period, and that is going to take a start. I think another reason why I'm thinking of changing it to range is because it opens up the possibility of actually passing a range, Ruby range object in, which might be nice. I might not end up doing it, but then if we did, the naming would make sense. Okay. Workdays in between. This needs to workdays in range. So this range start, range end. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I use Vim key bindings in my editor. I've used Vim for forever. And I'm also using GitHub Copilot. Okay, so we have range start, range end. We need to pass in there. That's going to give us the work days in the range, give us the person's work days, intersected with the reservations work days. Okay, let's run the spec, see if it passes. I changed quite a bit. This is one of the beauties of test-driven development is, you work with a relative amount of confidence that if you've broken something, you're going to be able to figure out what, identify that. So wrong number of arguments, given 1, expected 2. So our spec here, our spec is doing keyword arguments or a hash. Do we want to do that? We don't want to do it with that because we could overlap the start date and end date of the, I just think that naming is confusing. So what I'm doing is I'm just changing the call to see how I feel about this. Okay, reservation days in range, and you give it 2 dates. I feel okay about that. Comparison of date with string failed. So we were passing in a string date, and it is doing comparison. So it's never actually doing the conversion to date. So I think we probably want to do that conversion right at the top. In fact, I'm wondering, I don't think our specs were passing in strings before because they were coming from a form on the report. And so they were strings. Having our specs at the model level take in a string date, it's not great. Even though you're able to do it with a model, and it's going to convert the date. Just wondering. Yeah. So for ease of, yeah, so let's change our spec here to pass in a date. And then, the form handling will do the date conversion when it's necessary. I feel better about that. I think that is cool. So now that's returning 5. So let's just adjust our other specs. Cool. Thanks, Daniel, for watching. I appreciate it. And those Vim videos, we created them many years ago now at this point, but they're still pretty great. I encourage anybody who hasn't watched them to watch them. I'm a big believer in being able to move around your editor quickly. You notice I'm using the mouse, a fair bit, but the more you can, it's more about being quick, being comfortable moving around, than being, never touching the mouse, for me anyway. So again, we're not having to touch these because Active Record is doing the conversion for us, but for these, for these we need to. So we're going to be back on the stream tomorrow. I'm going to be joined by Dimitar. He is a developer on our Fusion team, which is our Europe, West Asia, and Africa team. Dimitar lives in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken. So Dimitar and I are going to work on some Rails work. I'm not quite exactly sure what we're going to work on yet, but it's going to be along the lines of similar functionality to this. Maybe we'll try to dive into something in the UI as well. And we're going to be starting at 9 a.m. US Eastern time tomorrow, which will be early in the day for people who are in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, West Asia and Africa, rather. Cool. So that spec passed. And so now I'm running the specs for the whole file. They all pass. We didn't change any of the example dates, and we have these methods, this method over here, to compute the days in the range, and it's giving us that. So that's nice. We now need to change the report to use that. We didn't change the report at all. So this has two things where it's period work days, and period work days was just getting the start and end date from the reservation itself and from the report, start date and end date. So now we have the record is the reservation, and we have days in range, start date and end date. And for number of hours, it's just multiplying by 8. Cool. So now we should be able to delete that code. So we removed the specs for this from the report. So I'm expecting things. So Joseph, that's a great question. Why not presenters instead of instance methods? It's a good question. I don't think if you were to use presenters, it would be wrong by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just thinking, is the only place this is used in the view? And do we always wrap? We're not currently using presenter for this object. That's one strike against presenters. We would need to introduce them. The other is this the only place, and is it always at the view level? It happens to be right now, but I just wasn't confident that we would both want to introduce a presenter and do it. So right off the bat, that would be the two reasons why I wouldn't naturally reach for a presenter. If we were already using a presenter, if we already had a reservation presenter, I probably would. But I tend not to reach for presenters right off the bat, especially for these kinds of things. Like, this is really sort of business logic, which is core to, in my opinion, this is business logic, which is core to the reservation itself. The reservation should know how to be able to tell you how many days it's for. And so I would push that right down into the model and not a presenter. Another place that something like this could live, business logic could live, is in what people call a service object or something. So it would be something outside of the object which is responsible for computing the number of days for a reservation. That also could make a lot of sense, especially if that was your general pattern in your application. It's not the general pattern we have here, so I wouldn't naturally reach for that. Okay. So I'm going to commit this. I hope that answers your question, Joseph. Thank you very much. Move workdays calculation from report to reservation. It's too long. Okay, so that moves. So we've refactored where that is. We didn't change any functionality, actually. We've just refactored where it is. So we're making the change that we want to make easier, and now we're ready to make the change. On some applications and some teams, you might even open the pull request for just your refactoring at this point and say, this is just a change. There's no functionality. That would be totally valid too. No one else is watching right now. No one else is available to review the pull request. So we're just going to keep on going with our change now that we've refactored to make it easy. So we're going to go over to our reservation spec. We're going to write a similar spec to one of these that sets up a holiday in this range and confirms that the holiday is not included in the time counted in the range. Just looking to see whether there's a good spec to use as the basis of this. Has a value of 0 and only a weekend. Okay, there's not really, so we'll just write a new one. So what we're doing is it excludes holidays. So this spec right here is setting up a validation over the weekend. So we don't want that, but that's okay. We're going to bring up a calendar, and there's no holidays off this week, and it's October 30th to November 3rd. So we can just do a reservation for the whole week. Oh, we need to travel. I'm actually not sure we need to travel for this spec the way that this is written. That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure we actually need to. So let's change it, and then so we're going to create a holiday. Holidays are often on Mondays. So we'll do that the holiday is Monday. But we're now just asking how many days off were the whole week. So, and what we should get after we write this spec, we should get 4 and not 5. And so what we want to do is we create another reservation. We need to create a reservation type. I have to remind myself how reservations types work. Go over the model there. So reservation types are just whether they're paid or not, and a name. It's interesting because we don't necessarily want to just exclude by name, and none of the existing flags, whether they're active, whether it's paid, or whether it's reportable. We actually might be able to use reportable. Let me go to look at the real system here. Just bringing it up in another window. So, okay, here we go. So here are the different types that we have. And this is using administrate for this portion of the application. So vacation is reportable. Bereavement leave is not reportable. Company event, not reportable. Company holiday, not reportable. Vaccination leave is reportable. Okay, so we can't use reportable because reportable time, there's too many things that are either reportable or not reportable. And so that's not going to work. I think what we want to do is add a new flag to reservation type called something like either explicitly like public holiday, or something that describes the behavior, like remove from overlapping. Actually, is what we want here actually because this is only supposed to happen for vacation. So maybe we want vacation to have any other time off that is on the schedule removed from the count. I think that that's probably what we want. So we still need to have a new flag here, but it's going to be the inverse of what I was talking about. So the way I like to do this is I'm going to write the spec like it's going to be, even though it's not there yet. So we have a reservation type with a name. So we have vacation reservation type. And this is going to be I think we call it something like remove overlap from total. So for this vacation reservation type, any other overlapping reservations will be removed from the total. And then we need another reservation type and that's going to be false. Oops. Okay, so now this first reservation is going to use that vacation type. And then there's going to be another one on Monday. On the Monday of this week. It should be 10:30. And this will be 10:30. And then we need to set the type. Public holiday reservation type. So okay. So now what we're checking is the vacation reservation days in range is 1, or is 4 rather. And we might as well check that the public holidays days in range is equal to 1. Might as well. It's not going to hurt to do that. And you notice I was removing the leading zeros because that would indicate that the error. So that's going to be an octal literal. So you got to be careful not to have a leading zero there. And I think I'm going to write this in the same way. now that we have those. Okay, so we've written the spec, and we've introduced new attributes and behavior into this. So that's exactly what we want. It's going to fail. And now we can let the specs guide us into what we do next. And it's going to keep up allowing us to just take it step by step. So undefined method, remove overlap from total. So we need to add a migration, Rails-G migration, add remove overlap from total to reservation types. So then we're going to add a column to reservation types, removing overlap from the total. It's a Boolean, defaults to false, needs to be set, can't be null. And the default to false is fine. That is what we want. And we're not going to set anything in this. So when you do migrations, we could try to find the vacation reservation type and set it to true in this migration. There's two reasons why I'm not doing that. Generally, I like to avoid migrating data in reservations when it's about behavior. If we're changing fields and data needs to change and we can do it quickly, I'm inclined to do that. But if it's about behavior, I'll tend not to do it. And the reason why is this aids in the rollout. So we're going to deploy it. We're not going to introduce this functionality. And then I'll manually go in the UI and turn it on for this one reservation type and validate that things are working the way that we can. And it means that if this deploys, because main of this application, the main branch of this application deploys by automatically anytime main passes, it means that, this functionality is not going to go live until I'm ready for it to go live. And so that's why I would generally do that. Okay, so now we've introduced the migration. We'll run rake db migrate. So now we'll run our specs again, and it's still not going to pass, but it should show us the next thing to do. So we expected 4 and we got 5. So that is exactly the error for the functionality that we were trying to create. And so now we can go over to the reservation and we can actually write the implementation. So when we're computing the days in the range, if we're supposed to remove overlapping from this one, then we need to do that. So I think this is where we're going to do it. We have the number of the workday. Number of workdays in the range. What we're currently doing is we are finding there are regular workdays, the workdays in the reservation, finding the intersection of them. So I think what we're going to do is do something like here. When we look at the days in the range, we have the number of total days in the range times the amount of the day. That is the amount of time for this thing, this reservation. And then I think what we want to do is subtract 0.5. No, we want to subtract overlapping. So this is a long line. It's longer than 80 characters. We generally like to wrap and make it shorter. That's fine. What I'm going to do now is just implement this method and clean things up. So I'm just looking at what Copilot was doing for us there. Reservations between those two dates where it's not, yeah. So give me the other reservations for the person, and let's just check. Yeah, so between is a scope that we have on this. So that's fine. So give me the reservations between the two dates where it's not this reservation. So we only want to do this if we're supposed to be removing the overlap from title. Else, the number of overlapping days is going to be 0. We're not going to subtract anything from this. So what we have here is the actual reservations. And so so we're going to call days in range for each of these reservations and get their total days in range. Cool. So reservation days in range starts on and ends on. It's not starts on and ends on. I let Copilot. It's oh wait. Yes, sorry. It is starts on and ends on. So we're looking for the overlap with this reservation. So we can just ask it for how many days this reservation has in this range. Okay, there's a possibility this is going to pass now. So let's give it a run and see what happens. Okay, so we are still getting 5 here where it expects 4. So we'll go back to the model. So I had subtracted the overlapping reservation days. And it should do that. And still got 5. Okay. Let's just verify that our setup is correct here. We've got a vacation where remove overlap is true, a holiday where remove overlap is false. We're creating from Monday to Friday with the vacation. We're creating a Monday holiday with the holiday type. And then we're asking the vacation how many days are in the range, and we expect it to be 1 less, but we're getting 5. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just verify whether days in whether we're getting anything overlapping back here. Easiest, quickest way to do this right here is just use a put statement. So let's just do that. So it is 0, so that means that it's not getting any overlapping reservation days, or remove overlap from total. Is false. So let's so it's true. So let's see what these two things give us. We've got the one where it's giving all reservations in the range, and another one where it's not the current ID. Okay, so whoops. Reservation for the person is only returning one reservation for starts on and ends on. And that reservation type, I can't tell what it is from that printout. Okay. So hey there, thanks for joining. And just a reminder, if you've got any questions, feel free to let us know in the comments. Questions are always welcome, whether it's about directly what I'm working on or something else. What we're working on is a real system that we use at thoughtbot for scheduling, and we are adding functionality so that when you have time off scheduled over a public holiday and you ask that time off how many days it is, it doesn't include the public holiday day for reporting purposes. So we're not getting any reservations returned between the start date and the end date of this. So that leads me to double check. Got start date ends on. We're not setting the person on this. So they are being created, but they're being created for different people. So on this second reservation, we need to say person and then set it to the same person as the vacation reservation. Okay, so that passed. And both of them pass. So we can see that the public holiday reservation is not having the vacation subtracted from it, but the vacation one is having the public holiday removed from its overlap. So let's just take a look at the diff. What did we change? Okay, we changed. So one of the things I like to do is look at the diff and say, oh yeah, I should change that. So I'm just doing like a quick self code review. I'm noticing I have a long line here, so I want to get rid of that. This is a little bit something that could be abstracted into another method. And then we have our schema being modified, and we have our new spec. So I think what I'm going to do, come over here, and remove this overlap, move this long line. So what are some ways we could do that? We extract a method. So we could extract a method. We could extract this into a method, the workdays in range. We already have so many similar named methods here. I'm a little reluctant to do that. The other option would be to take this and move it down into workdays in range. So it's still a long line. So again, I can move with confidence here because I know that I'm not going to break this, or if I break the specs, I have a passing spec. So I can change whatever I want to change here and know that I'm not going to break something. And if I do break something, it's going to show up as a regression. Okay, so I think I'm gonna then introduce I think it'll just be overlapping reservations. And that is gonna be this. This is gonna give me the actual reservations that overlap with this one. So now we can just say and so now that's a little better. We have overlapping reservations. We sum up the days in the range from each of those reservations. And we have the work days in the range minus the overlapping reservation days. And then we have this here. Okay. I'm not strictly opposed to everything being cut at 80, and this is reasonable. It's readable, in my opinion, so I'm just going to leave that. I'm going to rerun the specs, make sure that we haven't broken anything. So Just Smile says, do you think it's worth learning Rails late 2023? What is the saying? The best time to learn Rails was 15 years ago. The second best time is today. There are still lots of applications out there building Rails, and you can always get a job at thoughtbot once you learn Rails. So that's a plus too. No, I love Ruby and Rails, and it still does things that really no application framework does today that leads to a lot of productivity in our work. So now I'm looking at that diff again, and it's looking a little bit cleaner now. So let's commit. Thanks for the question, Just Smile. Appreciate it. Again, I'm biased, obviously, but I've been doing this for a while, and I try to keep up to date with new frameworks, and I still believe Rails is a really good fit for lots of things. Okay, so we have our reservation, and what we did was we remove overlapping reservations from. Well, actually, what we're doing is we're add ability to exclude overlapping reservations. So let's go that ticket number. That's the wrong one. So the ticket number is 5293. Hey, welcome. Okay, this introduces a new Boolean on reservation type that indicates that any overlapping time off reservations should be excluded from the count of time off for this reservation. This is so that public holidays and other time off do not get double counted. I just realized I had two commits on this branch. We had our initial refactoring and then the commit to close about the actual feature. I'm going to leave those both as is because they'll tell there are two independent commits. And so I'm going to open the pull request. I should have customized the thing. So it's just okay, so that's better. So while that runs on CI, it might break things. Let's go back to our other pull requests that we had opened earlier today. So this is our fixing the commitment. This is passing. So we're merging that into main, and we're merging and we're deleting the branch. So now that's merged. And it looks like we had a failure for this one. So let's see what that failure is. Okay, so this is an unrelated failure. This is a flaky spec, and it fails every, I don't know, 10 runs or so. I'm not exactly sure why, and it's only happened over the last few weeks. So is it hard to maintain a big Rails app? I don't know that it's harder to maintain. Thanks for the question. I don't know that it's harder to maintain a big Rails app than it is to maintain any other big web application. You apply a lot of the same techniques. Thanks for the question. Thanks for the question, Just Smile. And video Satish asks, how was a PR created from the terminal? I'm using GH, which is the GitHub provided command line client. So that includes a bunch of different helpers, and you can say GH PR, and then you can say create. And then in this case, I did -- fill. So that'll take the commits and build a pull request based on that. And that is a GitHub CLI. It's made by GitHub. And so if you're on a Mac, you can brew install GH. Otherwise, you can download it and install it. Cool. Thanks for the question. I hope that helps. Lots of good questions coming in. Uh, so what can I do after learning React.js? I would say that first, the first question I would ask is, do you know a server-side framework? GH works on Arch as well. It's only showing me the download for Mac because it detected I'm on a Mac. So you'll be able to you'll, if you go to this on your computer, cli.github.com, you'll get directions for Linux. I hope that helps. So the question was, after learning React. So if you don't know a server-side web development framework and you only know React and you're looking to learn something new, I highly recommend learning a server-side development framework. Becoming a full-stack web developer is really powerful. If you aren't interested in that, then I would another option would be to leverage your React knowledge and learn React Native to learn mobile development. But I really understanding the end-to-end web development flow and being able to write backends is really powerful. So I would recommend that. I hope that's helpful. Thanks for the question. So this spec failed on CI, but it's a flaky spec. So we're going to be able to merge this. We're going to go back into our branch. I already merged something in, so we're going to rebase it. And push, and then delete the branch. So now that's closed. So now we have our spec for the work that we just did. It's running on CI. So let's see what that comes back with. Our pull requests that we had are both merged in. And here's the ticket that we were working on. This is now closed. This is a team member who reported this ticket, so I'm going to so this is real stuff here, folks. So I don't want to start a flame war here, but the question is Node.js better for server side? The answer is no. Node.js is not better for the majority of web applications for server side development. I feel pretty confident in that answer, although there's lots of people out there who'll disagree with me. The strongest argument for learning Node, based on your prior question, is that with Node.js, you're not going to need to learn a new programming language. You're going to be able to continue to use JavaScript, and that might be more comfortable for you. The other thing is there's a difference between what would you write production applications in, and if I don't know a backend development framework and I'm a React developer, what's the thing I should learn? Those are two different questions, and so they might have different answers. And so it seems very reasonable to me to begin to dip your toe into back-end web development using Node.js because you're most comfortable with that. You're not going to need to learn a new language. But Node.js is not the right solution for every web development, every web application out there. And it might not be the best solution for what you're trying to build. You can apply it to almost everything and it can be used for almost everything, but it might not be the best thing for everything. And that might be okay. So from a naive perspective, straightforward perspective, learning Node.js, if you already know React, is a very straightforward path. And applying Node to the problems that you have might be good. But that doesn't mean that it's better. And that's why I'm parsing the language on this. Is it better? No, it's not better. Is it what you should do sometimes? Yeah, probably. Just like depending on the circumstances, Rails might be the better choice, but it isn't universally the better choice. Okay. So I mentioned before, you may have caught it, main passes. When main passes, it automatically deploys to production. So I don't know that that's done now, but I'm just going to comment for Valeria saying, thanks again for reporting this issue. I've implemented a fix and it is deploying now. Cool. So we've got our, we've got our open pull requests here. So nice. So on CI, all of the specs ran across all the different reservation and all the different scheduling functionality, and the functionality that we introduced here did not cause anything to break. So that's nice. So I'm going to merge this in as well. Oh, I had already rebased. Oh no, I already. So then we push and we delete the branch. And so that's automatically when main pass is going to deploy. Another good question, are Hotwire projects easier to test than React Rails projects? My testing strategy for both of the applications, and I think a lot of people's is pretty similar. We're going to use Capybara feature specs to do sort of like the majority of the work. And then we're going to go down in the levels from there. So are they easier to test? I would say the testing is probably the same effort. I think where you run into ease or amount of time is React applications on top of Rails. You've introduced a whole nother layer of functionality. And so I would say they're longer to implement. Then that's generally what we'll see is that a React application with a server-side backend is generally more effort to implement than a Rails application using Hotwire and Turbo. Is it monumental amounts? It depends on what your application is doing. It's not huge, but I would say that's where the time is actually time savings is, not necessarily on the testing. The testing is going to be using Capybara feature specs and then perhaps another JavaScript testing framework to test JavaScript in isolation. And that strategy is going to be the same on both. Awesome. Thanks for all the questions, everybody. I really appreciate it. So now we've done 3 tickets. They're deploying in the background. We have wrapped up all of the things that we had in progress. So let's clean up our windows here and refresh our project tracker. So I'm planning on going till about 5 p.m. Eastern time today. We're wrapped up with all the individual tickets that we were working on. So I'm looking at the top of the backlog and seeing whether I want to pick up the next ticket. Detect and notify about assignments with no position. Now, this is another model level thing, very similar to what we've been working on. We could continue with that, but I'm looking, I got a twinkle in my eye for the next issue and what this is we have a search in Hub, and there's a usability problem with this. Let me see if I can demonstrate what it is. So here's the search. It's a command palette for searching against an Elasticsearch instance. I just have to check whether my development environment is set up. So yeah, cool, it is. So this is a search against an Elasticsearch. It searches all of these things: bookmarks, shortcuts, people, clients, handbook, projects, messages, candidates, blog, our blog, opportunities, and guides, and our guides. And so when you search, it searches for all these things. So let's search for product design sprint. It's going to give clients and handbook things and the projects and messages, opportunities. So the way, if you say, for example, that I only want to do search for messages that include this, then you can click on that and you can just get the messages that and search just for messages. You can also add things like this, or there's an option to select all. So someone created a ticket that if you remove all of them, they didn't know why nothing was coming up. They ended up in a situation where they removed all of the items and they're like, it's not searching for anything. Why am I not getting anything? And it's not obvious what to do in that scenario if you've gotten yourself into this position, because there's no indicator that nothing is being searched. You need to click in here to see, oh, okay, I can put them back and I'm going to get things. But, you know, it's not intuitive. So what I want to do is I want to figure out how to, when you get yourself in this situation, it should say something like none, or it should say something about what's happening here in the UI. So let's take a look at this code. This is using Stimulus to provide this functionality. Let's create a branch first. Indicate no search items. So this is using Stimulus, and it is a search controller.js. And that autocomplete tagging interface is provided by choices.js. And this is our Stimulus controller. So we can see that choices.js is being instantiated here and set up, assigned to this .choices. So the Stimulus controller has the choices instance. I want to go back here. So there's no placeholder on this field, and you wouldn't want the placeholder to always say search nothing. But potentially, I know choices.js has the capability of putting a placeholder, so that would be one option. If when there's nothing in here, we could add a placeholder that says, hey, there's nothing in here, choose something. That would be one option. Another option may be that we can mimic that using CSS. So when there is nothing in here, then use some CSS content before or after or something and put it there. I'm a little less confident with that solution. So while I think through that and you all think through that, I'll look at this question. Do the tests take longer on our React Rails project because of the JS stack? So if you're doing everything end-to-end testing, they're not technically going to take longer, but by using Hotwire and Turbo, you can write some specs that don't do JavaScript because most things gracefully degrade. And so you can speed up your specs a little bit by writing them and then in the same way you normally would, and then not having them use JavaScript. And that will be faster. The downside to that is that it is not fully exercising the JavaScript. And so, what you'll tend to see is a compromise. So you'll have happy path specs that fully exercise the JavaScript, and then other specs that don't use the JavaScript engine and just use the gracefully degraded behavior. And that tends to be a compromise that keeps the test quick without having to run, without having lack of coverage. Okay, I wonder if anybody in the chat has a suggestion for how this should work. Do we want to try to put the placeholder there? Do we think the UI should be a little something different? I'm leaning towards trying to, when there is nothing, put a little placeholder that says select, that tells the user what's going on. So let's look at the choices JS documentation. Configuration options. I mentioned, I know it has a placeholder. Placeholder true, placeholder value, and search placeholder value. Those are configuration options. Sometimes you can't change a configuration option on the fly once it's been set. And then I know from using choices before that there is a generally the way you would do it is with events. So we have the concept of events here. We have add item. Where's the list of events? So for events, we have add item, remove item, highlight item, unhighlight item, choice, change, search, show dropdown, highlight choice. Okay, so I think what we want to do is probably listen to the change event and look, and if there's nothing selected, then try to put a placeholder there. So let's see. I will say that a lot of the specs for the searching functionality are a little bit all over the place or lacking in this app. You know, and every app has some corner of the application which ended up not being very well tested. I think this is probably one for this application. Cool. So let's introduce a feature search, a search feature spec. It'll be the first one that there is for this functionality. So a touch spec features search spec. And this is going to be a JavaScript runner. So our scenario is So this is not. So we need a person who's going to log in and use the system. And we want to click on search. So the way that this works, I'm familiar with this, but there's this search up here, and that brings up the command palette. You can also hit Command K, and it'll bring up the search palette. But for the purposes of our spec, we'll do that. And so what we expect to see is expect the page not to have content. What do we want this to say? We'll probably end up refining it from a UI perspective, but we'll say searching nothing. And then the way we do this in the JS runner is we just say JS true. That's going to run in headless Chrome. So then what we want to do is click on remove all. Let's just check to see whether. So these click on is going to use ARIA attributes if there is one. And I see the tooltip is clear all. So that's not going to work. CodePilot was just making a guess. But we should be able to eventually do clear all. And then once we do that, the page should have the content searching nothing. So let's run this spec, and that is going to fail. Oh, I didn't do the right syntax in the spec here. See, it should be feature and then scenario inside the feature. So there. So that's the syntax. I have a typo in the factory here. Okay, so the failure is about a whole bunch of accessibility violations. And that reminds me that the chosen JS library, it doesn't pass our accessibility checks. So we have been temporarily ignoring everything while we find an alternative library. And so the syntax for ignoring have to find so I'm just finding, yeah, skip accessibility audits should do it. And then the other option is to skip select ones. For the purposes of this, I'm going to skip all of them because there's a bunch of them that aren't valid, and we can always clean it up after. Okay, so it couldn't find a link clear all. So there's a couple of things. So if you haven't seen this before, this is really cool. What it does when there's a failure, it captures a screenshot. So, and you can click on that and you can see what the headless browser was seeing. So this is what we're seeing in our spec. This is what we're seeing in our spec. And, it couldn't find a button clear all. That's fine. It's what I expected because that was just the data tooltip and it wasn't the ARIA label. So let's go over to the view. Here's the data tooltip. And this is a inline SVG. I think we can just say but I'm not 100% sure about that. So let's go look. Now, if we inspect this, we have a tooltip, but we didn't get the ARIA information. So inline SVG tag comes from a gem called inline SVG. And there's a whole section around ARIA. So some of the adds common accessibility, ARIA true. We want to set title. That's right. SVG tags actually don't support ARIA labels. So let's see if this gives us what we want. Now, that being said, I don't know that Capybara can handle title, will find a title in an SVG in order to click on it. So the failure is unable to find link or button clear all. And so, yeah, it's not finding that. So that's okay. And that leads me, so if we take a closer look at this, this is an inline SVG tag in a div. And this has the action on the SVG to clear all. So a better way to write this would be to actually put this in a button tag and then move the stuff up to the button so that it's more accessible, it's keyboard navigable, and Capybara can find it. So let's actually do that. And this is one of the benefit of writing specs. We didn't have specs for this functionality before we did it, and it's making our code better, more semantic, more accessible. We got another question from Satish, who asks, how is the screenshot on failure done? That is a gem. It's called Capybara Screenshot. So Capybara has the ability to take screenshots built in, but it does it automatically on failure with that gem, Capybara Screenshot. So give that gem a look if you haven't used it before. Okay, so we've got our button. And we need to move some stuff up into it for the functionality. So we've got an ARIA label of clear all, and then data action. I think we want the tooltip to also be on the button rather than the SVG as well. So although I have to be honest, I didn't notice the tooltip when I moused over it in the actual running application. So maybe there's something not quite working about that. Okay, so now we've got those things. Let's go just to our page. Make sure, oh, it's the style's a little bit different because of the button, but now we've got our tooltip as well. We'll fix that styling later. Let's see if Capybar is able to find the button now. Cool, it was able to. And so now it fails. It expected to find the text searching nothing right here on the last step, and it didn't find it. In fact, what it did find is the text sign in with Google. So that to me means, let's take a look at the failure. So we got kicked back to the sign in page here. I'm guessing the reason why that happened is when we change from a button to clicking on the SVG to clicking on a button, it's actually trying to submit a form with that button. And so we need to tell the clear all method to prevent default now. Let's see if that, it's still not going to pass because we don't have our placeholder functionality in place, but hopefully it doesn't end up on the sign in page. Yeah, cool. So now it's failing. It's clicked on the button and no, that text that we're looking for is not displaying there. Nice. So now let's try to actually listen for that event. Let's see if we're already listening for any choices events. So we are, we're adding a event listener to a highlight item. I don't know what this past element is. Okay, so that's the two things. I'm not sure what this .choices.past element. Let's look at the docs again for that. So highlight item is triggered each time an item is highlighted, is what it says. It's just weird to me that we're digging down all the way into the choices.past element. Well, let's assume that that's what we need to do in order to bind to the right place. So we're going to add an event listener to change. And we're going to bind, what should we call this? So we're setting up a new choices changed event. So I don't know. That is definitely, Copilot is definitely on the wrong track there. But I see this setting selected types uses this.choices.getValue, which returns an array of the selected items. So I think we want to do this.choices.getValue, yeah, equals 0. Then, so we're going to need to figure out how to set the placeholder. I'm sure that this is not the right way to do it. But let's just see how that behaves and what it gives us. So we're going to run the specs. I forget whether in this application a JavaScript error is going to show up in our console. There is a way to make it do that, but it looks like that's not the case. So it just didn't work the way that we were expecting. So that's fine. I didn't really expect it to work. So let's go over here and make sure we have our JavaScript console up for all. Let's see if we get a JavaScript error. We're going to remove everything. Don't get an error. So there's nothing appearing in the console there. So let's just try. I want to verify that this is being called. And then I think I want to okay, let's see what that does. Okay, so I did two things. It is being called and it is printing out the array, but you can see I am removing things and get values is returning that. And so everything's working. Length is 0 and length is 0, but that placeholder value being set is not working. I didn't expect that to work, and so that is working like I expect. Okay, let's think about this. While we think about it, I'm going to take a quick break. I appreciate everyone watching. We'll come back and we'll wrap up, and I will go over a little over time. Appreciate everyone watching. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back from the quick break. I refreshed my water. I'm good to go. Just a reminder that if you can work with thoughtbot to make a new Rails app, maintain or improve or scale an existing app. We also do great mobile development as well as product design and product management. So get in touch with us at thoughtbot.com/hire us. If you are just tuning in, we are working on improving the search functionality of this command palette, making it so that when someone removes all the items from it, they are told that that is what has happened, because it's confusing to be at this and to not have anything here and to not know why you're not able to find anything. So we're going to add the text there to indicate that. We know that we are ending up in the right place for our change handler, but that is not working in terms of setting the placeholder value. We did notice that there was another thing to say placeholder is true. And in this one, placeholder I still don't think that this is going to work, but I just want to verify that it doesn't. Okay. So let's look at the HTML here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So we have this input here, which is the box, and there's no placeholder on it now. Let's just, to make sure we're on the right track here, this is normal HTML. Let's just see how this looks and see whether we're on the right track. Okay, yeah, so if that said something like nothing to search, choose at least one item. Oh, okay, the width of that is a little off, but we can fix that. I think that would I think that'd be a little bit more clear. So nothing to search, choose at least one item. I think that's going to improve the user experience. So I feel like we're on the right track here in terms of how we want to end up. So we can, first, I think we should try to figure out how to get choices.js placeholder using like built-in functionality, but there's a chance that we're just not going to be able to do that. And in that case, we might be able to get the input element and set the placeholder manually and then remove it when we no longer have nothing selected. In fact, maybe we should just check to see whether choices.js has a method to get the input. So we had our methods list here. Destroy, init, highlight all, unhighlight all, show dropdown, hide dropdown, clear choices, get value, set value, clear input. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything there. So let's love, and I'm being sarcastic, but not entirely so, digging into JavaScript objects created by other JavaScript libraries. It's just sort of fun to do that, I think. So if we go over to our console now, here's our choices object. What I'm looking for is to see whether I can get the input element. So I'm not seeing, I see an input element right here, but that is the cloned. Actually, that might be. Oh, it is. Okay, so that is the input element. And so it's available as an input. Input, and then it has an element on it. I just want to see what that is if we log it. Okay, so that is so I think we say dot input dot element. So that gives us the input now. And so now we should be able to say, and then else if there's anything else selected. Oh wait, dot. And then if there is something, we're going to do nothing in the placeholder there. Okay, didn't work. Don't let that get us down. Let's see if we got a JavaScript error. We didn't, and it logged the input. Just going to inspect that element, see. So I notice it has the placeholder attribute, but it has no value. I sort of wonder if the library is actually removing it, because the library has an option to have a placeholder. And so it might default to false. Let's see what the documentation says. Okay. Let's just make sure it's not being overwritten by these values here. So let's set them here and then okay, so it's still not showing up. And if we inspect this, just looking, see, now it doesn't have the placeholder attribute at all. Here it does. Oh, and here it does. Okay, so let's we're not getting a JavaScript error. So let's just make sure. Okay, so we just removed, oh, look. It's there, but when we were it's not there when we use this button to clear all. So we're going to need to fix that. But it is there when we remove them all one by one. And one thing I noticed when I was just looking at that is if here's the log, the console log over here. If you remove everything, you see it's not here. So that is not firing the change event. I don't remember whether there was another event for add item, remove item, unhighlight item, choice, change, search, show dropdown, hide dropdown, highlight choice. So there, destroy, init, highlight all, unhighlight all. So these are the methods. So it looks like there's not an event for that clear all. And I'm realizing now as I say that out loud, that's because that is not built-in functionality. That is a method that we have in our search controller, and we are calling remove active items. And we're doing that manually. So that's cool because that means that we can then call what was it called? Choices changed. Okay, so let's go back here, and now we should see the text. Awesome. So we have the text. So we want that placeholder to be 100%. So a max width to be 100%. What was that max width already set to, though? I'm a little... So the it's min width. And that is coming from CSS 10ch. I'm wondering whether we should make that change in CSS. So here's where we're doing this. Well, let's just see what happens. That's min width. Oh, min width. Okay, that's fine because we and then the max width. Okay. Okay, let's see how this looks. Remove everything. It did not change the max width. Wonder whether that important. I forget whether you can do this in the style elements for JavaScript. Sorry, I forgot to pay attention to the chat, and Just Smile asked, do you work with React Native? If yes, how does it compare to native mode? So I know both native mobile development and React Native. I know I've done a little bit more React Native development than I've done native mobile development. Nowadays, it compares pretty favorably, particularly if you're trying to work quickly, launching a new iOS and Android applications. There's a lot to like about React Native in terms of how quickly you can do that. It's not necessarily the right fit for every application all of the time and forever, but it can be pretty great. Hope that helps. Thanks for the question. So we are trying to get the max width here to reflect, and it's not. But let's, so at this point, our specs should pass. So it's been a little while since we ran them. So let's run the specs and make sure our specs pass. Nope. So it looked for searching nothing, and it didn't find it. We have our screenshot here. Oh, that was the wrong zoom that I wanted. So it is showing up in the screenshot. And now that makes me think that maybe Capybara doesn't search placeholder values for text. So let's just verify that. Capybara placeholder text. Yeah, so it looks to me like it uh, doesn't. So it looks to me like it doesn't. So we need to modify our spec. Um, so we can use have, oops, I put it in the wrong place. We can do have CSS, and then we can do input. So that's going to look for a placeholder, an input with the placeholder. Let's see what happens with that. Still didn't pass. Expected not to find a visible CSS. Searching nothing. Found one match. Oh, I copied and pasted and that didn't change the spec. So now that's going to tell us it's going to pass. Cool. So we start not having the placeholder, we clear everything, and we do have the placeholder. So that's the behavior we want. It looks to me like we have two things we need to do. We need to fix the width of this. And we need to adjust. This button is putting extra padding, padding around this that is messing up. So actually the padding might be fine. So let's take one more crack at doing the max width. If not, then like I said, we're going to be back on tomorrow at 9 in the morning US Eastern time, working on either this or some other things with my colleague Dimitar. He lives in Europe, and so we're going to be starting a little earlier tomorrow. Let's just see if we can get so JavaScript set max width style. I suspect that it's the important in those style sheet styles that's messing this up. So I think that that's what's happening here. So I'm just going to remove the important from that to try to verify. Actually, just remove the important. So it still looks like it has the max width, but let's. So the max width is now just 10 ch. And if I remove that entirely, then it shows the whole value. But it's notable to me that the JavaScript, the style being set in the JavaScript isn't there. Okay, well, I am going to make this commit. It'll be a work in progress commit. I think we'll wrap it up for the day. I really appreciate everyone watching, and I hope you'll join me again tomorrow as we continue with this, and then continue on to other things as well with this search feature and with Hub. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Really appreciate it. I really appreciate the great suggestions, questions, comments along the way. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day, and hopefully see you tomorrow. Thanks very much.